Hi, everyone. Sorry for a very small delay. We are here. You can turn on your camera if you want. We will record this workshop. So if your friends are not here, they will be still able to watch it. I'll just ask a question. If you will not feel comfortable at some point, you can ask me to translate something in Polish or to present something else. For a second, I wanted to say we maybe can conduct this in Polish, but then I realized that it would be better still to try to do it in English. And also because I have a slides in English. But yeah, if you will at any point had some issues with understanding something, some concept, and if you think that the Polish language can be useful, we can do it. So before we start, my name is Klaudia. I'm in the debating community for like 9 years. I was initially only doing the things for the Polish society. I was debating for Jagiellonian at World Championships in BP format. In the schools, I was helping coaching the Polish national team, C8, a couple of competitions. So I was responsible for motions and for judging. And I also have quite a lot of experience with coaching. So I hope it will be reflected here and it will be useful for you. If you have any questions, I like to have interactive workshops. So please use the raise hand function so we can be in touch. Again, if you want, you can turn on your camera. So I'll be talking to people, not the Zoom background, but it's up to you, of course. I have some presentation. It's not World School specific, but I also think that the material which I will be covering, it's not super World School specific, because it's not in any manual, but these are the things which will help you to do better arguments. These are the things which will help you how to think about the argumentation specifically, because it's what's the core of the debate, where you can make the difference, and when you can actually not hear from the judge that they don't know what you were trying to present, or that something was lacking the analysis. If you also think that it's more comfortable for you to type, you can type the questions in the chat on Zoom. I should be able to see this. All right. I think in that case, we can kick off. See that someone is in the waiting room. I think they should be now in. I will just prepare the slides. Okay, cool. All right, so it's called motion analysis, but it's very similar, right? You need to analyze the motion in order to know what the motion asks you to characterize, what you need to describe, and how to make the right proportion of the material which you are using. So let's start from the very beginning. So resources which I'm using are like some judging and speaking manuals, some personal experience, and knowledge from available workshops and written materials. Second of all, about the content, motion analysis, why this is important, some things which judges will expect you to do, and which will refer in their feedback, or what will be the criteria in which they will be judging the debate. Some useful tips to all practical. Nina, you need to mute yourself. Nina, you need to mute yourself.
Sure, yes.
Awesome. All good. And then we will be talking about the characterization based on the different types of motion, what kind of framing you can use. Framing is basically, you can identify this as the winning strategy, like a path to victory, how you are convincing people that they should listen to you, or that they should prioritize your material, or that you will be saying something necessarily meaningful. There are lots of definitions of framing, but this is also not something which people will be asking you, but this is also how you feel and how you understand the concept as a whole. So first of all, I think it's important what you are, misclick. It's important what you are learning at the very beginning, right? So you need to keep working on the routine, and you need to learn the basic steps. You couldn't be like, I already know how to like make this basic analysis, therefore I should go for like the advanced workshops, or I should go for like a more complicated concepts and argument. you can also practice that sort of things by yourself. This is something which you actually doing every day when you are telling your friends stories, your parents when you're coming home, or at school when you are referring to some situation. So basically, here you have some level of limitations, and also you have some level of guidance, some level of questions which people implicitly asking you. So for example, when I'm meeting my friends and I want to tell them what happened to me last week at my work, I can prioritize that as much as I want, right? I can start from the things which gave me very little joy. I can start with the things which they are familiar with. I don't need to present them a lot of details and a lot of context. I can just say, oh yeah, you remember my job, or like, oh, you remember my parents, or like, oh, you remember my friends from university. So basically, there are different things between the casual conversation and in the debating. So in the casual conversation, you are the one who is deciding about the rules, and you never know what will be the point of interest of the other person, right? Will your friend pick up on the detail what color had your dress? Will your friend pick up on the detail what kind of movie you were watching? In the debating, people have particular expectations in terms of what they want you to characterize and what they want you to deliver. And this is basically what we will be discussing here during this workshop. Some quotes from judging manual, even if it's not WSDC manual, the style and the thing remain the same. Team wins debates by being persuasive with respect to the burdens their side of the debate is attempting to prove. What does it mean is, A, you can't win without knowing the rules. B, the rules are also quite specific to the type of motion. So you should also familiarize yourself with the types of motions which you will be debating in. You need to know what's the difference between regrets, prefers the world, would do something, believes something. So there are also the things which will be extremely helpful in your debate development. The second thing is that the outcome of the debate should depend on what the team said. And here is the point. Judge must not intervene in the debate. So technically, the ideal debate assumes that everyone explains everything perfectly. One side will clearly explain why something should be prioritized, why something should be more important, and therefore judge just like summarizing the things. However, as you know, sometimes the explanation is on the same level on both teams. Sometimes judge just feel like the argument it's not finished, so they're trying to like conceptualize the impact of the argument or what will be the final of this argument by themselves. And this is the massive risk for the speaker because you are losing control over the narrative, what you are trying to say. I will give you the example. So so you might have like a politician who want to say, my policy is that the education is the most important part in the whole budget. I want to spend the significant portion of budget to the education, and I want to spend this to fill the economical gap between like the rich and the poor. I want to like eliminate the particular division which is between like their budgeting. I want to subsidize the poor people. If I will not give you the characterization, how exactly my policy will look like, you can interpret that in multiple different ways, right? For example, you might ask like the parents of the richer kids to pay for the education significantly more in order to subsidize. You might shift the money from the other taxes or from like the other budgeting stuff in your state. You might make some level of fluffer policy in terms of you will encourage people to do something, or you might also try to exchange with the companies in order for their financial support, some level of services from the schools or from the university. That means that if you are not specific, your case is open up to interpretation. And everyone in the debate who is not in your team will have interest to make an interpretation. The opposition team will interpret this in the best possible way for them. So try to present your case as not very good, as not very suitable, as not very realistic. For the judge, if they need to explain to you why you're losing, they also need to tell you how they conceptualizing your case, right? So they will not say, you didn't say absolutely nothing about that, because they need to compare it to the other side. So in that matter, you really want to be sure that people does not have a doubt what you are saying. When you are saying something have a big impact, what exactly the big mean? The word big might have different connotation, depends about the thing which you are referring to. Same with the money, right? The huge amount of money might be different for the middle class person and for the rich company. So you want to be always trying to point it out the relative value and that people understand what's the scale, what's the size of the effect you are referring to. Also, please avoid things like, this is obvious. You get what I mean? Bad things happen. Exactly because of these obvious things, sometimes it's problematic for people to win the debate. So for example, there was a motion, this house prefer a world without the religion. And personally, a lot of people in debate, me and a lot of people in debating, are atheists. They don't believe in God. And sometimes people in debating are using this bias, right? And they are just saying, religion's oppressive, therefore we should hate religion, we shouldn't want a world with religion. But then you have opposition team in the debate, and they are like, look, here is step by step what could replace religion potentially. Here are the things which religion actually give the values. Here is the size of the group of people which are affected. Here are the things which are not executing. And they are giving much more analysis and much more detailed things. Even if I still personally, in my deep belief, agree with the government side. As a judge, since I'm taking into account the amount of analysis and the reasoning, I will probably go with the opposition team. And this is what happened in that debate. Third point here, it's, I don't know what kind of TV series you're watching, but there are a lot of like fun-based, I don't know, forums or discussions, right? And people are like, or when you were having the literature classes and you are thinking what the author was thinking when he was like writing a poem or a book, or the painter with the painting. And then you have people, oh, he definitely thought this. Oh, it might means that. And usually, if you have more than one judge, this can also happen in the judging panel. One person might be like, oh, I understand this impact will be that way. No, I think the team was referring to that one. So what you want to give that all of the judges will see the same. They will clearly get your claim, your content, and they don't need to make the discussions and disputes like, oh, what exactly was the point which was presented. So I think that's some key important points in terms of like the introductions towards this workshop, towards the characterization / framing and debating. Are there any questions on that point? All right, you can always raise a question during my speaking, raise hand function or the chat, both working. Okay, we should not consider how important we think a particular argument is in abstract, but rather how important it becomes in this particular debate. What does it mean? For example, safety, it's an important value overall, but in some debates, it might not necessarily be super useful. It might not necessarily overcome the other principles which you might have, for example, like freedom in some particular context, in some motions. So it's not very helpful that you will create like a case file that's one argument worked for you in one motion, and you're like, okay, I will copy paste and deliver that in a different motion. Every time when you are using the argument, you need to link and connect that to the particular portion of material, to the particular burdens, in order to be persuasive, in order for that making sense. So for example, if a lot of debates, it's about the environment, about the animal rights, but you have a random debate about like just environmental movements, there are no mention about the animal suffering, there are probably more important clashes for you to deliver than to engage in the things which you know, which worked for you once, because there's no guarantee that exactly the same case will be beneficial for you now. Okay, there are different mechanisms of persuasion and different parts of characterization and framing. Of course, the things are good analysis, so you are able to explain the logical step one by one from point A to point D, for example. B, the good rebuttal. So you are good in spotting that some arguments or some comments from the other side are not very realistic. So there is a trend now that people tend to be very optimistic, and this is called like debate land. That people are making the arguments which you are like, yeah, there are 5 structural reasons, but if I look out of the street, if I read in the newspaper, I can't imagine that happening in the real life. Or for example, this movement maybe in theory have a lot of power, but practically this is not something which occurring. So there are the things which you need to challenge the other team. When someone is being too optimistic, or when you are not sure like what they're trying to present, you just need to question them and you need to point that out. But don't point that out only saying this is ridiculous. Moving on. You need to explain why what is the flaw in someone else's case. Most often, it will be bad assumption or like bad prediction on how the actors will behave. So what will be the reaction from the people, or like what will be the societal narrative around this, how successful you will be in implementing some policy. But most often it's just like hard to imagine that this is how exactly it will look like. In terms of the good strategic decisions, that's what I'm saying, right? The bad strategic decision would be just say, this is ridiculous, moving on, because both sides can have some arguments which are not very good. And then you are playing a roulette, right? Which argument will be better? So you always need to disprove the other team claim. So you are comparing the rebutted version of the other team case to your case. It's in your interest to weaken the side of the other team, to weaken the argument of the other side as much as possible before you're trying to compare your contributions within the debate. All right, using the examples. Sometimes there are motions which are very hard to conceptualize. It's just like, what I will do with this motion, or like, what conflict between which countries you are referring to. So try to find some similar situation where like the rule will be familiar, which you can copy and put into the debate. So for example, once we were debating about the Senkaku Island, which is like the islands near Japan, which they have dispute with China. We didn't know much about the Senkaku. Everything what we knew opening opposition already said. So we tried to run like a principle or like some general like thought, which was basically, as long as you are fighting for something, that means that the other side does not gain the comparative advantage. And if you will stop fighting and if you will be like, I'm giving you these islands, it means that not only you are not getting access to this, but you literally gave some other team anything. It's just like trying to depict what sort of mechanism, what sort of action will happen, and then trying to create the full story. I think this is necessarily useful. This was our experience with the IR motions when I was debating as well. Useful tips to all motion types. Before that, any questions? Any thoughts? Anything unclear? Something popped up in your mind? All right. If not, let's move on. So three things which you need to consider while thinking of characterization or framing for all types of motions. A, proportion. So I think it should be quite logical, right? If you will just spend $5 for like a gift for someone, presumably you can't get very rich gift, you can't get like golden necklace, or you can't get something which have significantly higher value on the average, right? So when you are saying, we will increase the tax by 0.0001%, so we will take it from the rich and we will redistribute that, we will do that, and that, unclear, because the revenue that you will get in the mechanism you are trying to use is very small. But B, again, you can't say that you will tax the rich people by 0.5%. Therefore, you will make them extremely angry, that they will create a revolution, revolt, that they will smash all of the people. Because it's hard to see such a disproportionate reaction to smaller action. So you always need to think about the proportions when you are creating your arguments. B, the plausibility. So I can say that, yeah, tomorrow there will be 60% of women in the parliament if we will implement like some level of encouragement or financial incentives for women to join the politics. However, it's seems kind of unplausible, right? That like, even if you will have some level of incentives, everyone will be like, oh yeah, we should go to politics, but also that the men will be like, oh yeah, we will let the women take over and come into the politics. So it seems implausible, which means that people will not buy your argument to the fullest extent. The third one, worst, better comparative. So people are saying, hey, there are plenty of alternatives in order to improve the education system compared to what you are saying. But what are these alternatives? Why these alternatives are better than what I'm proposing? Why these alternatives are visible? Why these alternatives will happen? Why these alternatives are something which people want? So you can't just say, we can solve this in the different way. You need to also present the plausible way, how the things will happen, what people can expect, right? Next one, long-term perspective. What will happen after a few months since policy will be implemented? People tend to be very short-termist, and people tend to think about the debating at the moment when the policy happened, just exactly. But think about that, like what sort of implications or connotations it might have in a few months. What will happen if this will continue? So every time when you are making some change, for example, that we ban like a menthol cigarettes in like European Union, and people are super mad, and people are like, it's like infringement on the freedom, like tobacco, great. But now no one remembers about this, right? Like there was some short-termist backlash. There are some people being dissatisfied that now we are like limiting some level of the product. But a few years later, like no one make a big deal out of this. So you also need to think that even if in some cases people will be angry initially, you can still show that there are more important values and that this anger is decreasing with the time. So that's like the 4 tips, which I would like you to keep in mind. So proportion, plausibility, worst, better comparative, and the long-term perspective. Any questions? All right, moving on. Proving premise and assumption to your case. So sometimes people are jumping immediately to the impact and telling us what amazing things will happen and why it will be important. But the question is how it will happen. What's the way in which like the things are to materialize, how it will be plausible to see, to reflect. So you need to focus on explaining why something will occur. What's the example of the false premise? So there was a motion that starting from tomorrow, women will start shooting lighting from their hands. Great motion, I know. So I was judging it, and the government team is telling me how the women will get more power, how they will like be walking on the street, how they will be like, the guys will be terrified of them. And the very simple response from up was like, guys, starting tomorrow. So the only thing which is changing, it's women randomly starting shooting lights from their hands. Obvious reaction would be to put them to jail, to some medical testing. Like people will be scared, you don't want them to hurt anyone. It will also be like, you are not prepared to this. It's not like you are burning with your power. It's like, I don't know, every day it's becoming stronger. You're just getting a lot of power immediately. How you will handle this, how you will control it. Because the team forgot the characterization, it caused them later to win the debate because they forgot that starting tomorrow, and also they never characterized how the world actually look like. Therefore, they encounter some level of issues. Moving on. Read the motion twice to be sure that you didn't ignore some parts. As you can see, the first example is what I just said. that there is a starting tomorrow. Second motion, this house is someone with hyper empathy would not use that pill. There was some infos like what the pill means, right? What does it mean? It's you are not the average person. You are a person with hyper empathy, and it's in your interest to explain and to describe what's the reality of this person, what's potentially might be different for this person, what this person can potentially prioritize, etc., etc. So these are some important points which need to be delivered in this motion. 3, this house would allow children to sue their parents for religious indoctrination. Look, we can all agree that religious indoctrination is bad, that people shouldn't do that to their children. But here, there's specific mechanism that you will be suing your parents, which means that you still need to go to court. And in order to unlock your impact, you need to win the suing. So what you need to do on the government side, you need to, someone is unmuted again. Zuzanna, you are unmuted. Okay, I just muted. The next person, please, because I will be kicking out of the meeting because it's very destructive. So try to check if you are not unmuted. Suing parents for the religious indoctrination. Hey, what's the likelihood of you winning this suit? Maybe it should be only like threatening to that extent that you have this power. Maybe you don't need to use it and already have the effect. Maybe there is no other way to punish these people. I don't know. This is something which again need to be explained in order for this motion to work, in order for you on the government side to fulfilling the burden, because it's not easy to say, we should punish them, because opposition can say, yeah, let's punish them directly. Let's punish them in the other way, which might be like mutual exclusive. And then what we will do with this case. This house would actively encourage women to not have children. So there are differences, right, between the suggestion and active encouragement. If I'll say, hey, I'll give you 100 zloty per month to have children, that doesn't seem like active encouragement. B, who would agree to have a children for 100 zloty per month? So as you see, A, it's neither active encouragement. B, that doesn't seem to make my policy being effective or people listening to this. So again, probably require a little bit more work being done. B, this has a subsidized art that glorifies the working class. If you are subsidizing the art, it needs to come with the expense of the cost, with the money. Unless you will increase taxes and get additional money, presumably you are relocating this from one type of art to the another. So it also needs to be explained how it's happening, why in particular for the working class, what will be the impact. Maybe majority of people who are contributing taxes are from the working class, and maybe this will be art which talking about them. But maybe this art, it's not very appealing to people. Maybe people actually wanted to see the stuff which they are not familiar with, the stuff which coming from like the different group of people, like from the rich people, maybe something which you can which you can't feel every day. That's another like difference. All right, this house regrets the glamorization of startup culture that encourages people to start their own companies rather than pursue traditional career path. You have very clear comparatives, one versus the another. There are no option 3. There are no option 4. This is not about the working or not working. It's basically starting your own company or a traditional career path. So this is also important when you are considering strategy and thinking about emotions. This house believes that the creation of feminist icons and their cults of personality are good for the feminist movement. So again, it can be good for the culture, it can be good for the men, it can be good for the education. But your burden is to show why it's good for the feminist movement. You don't care about the other groups of people. you are hyper focusing on this. In order to achieve that, you need to tell people what's the feminist movement, what they take care of, what they would prioritize, and why you are able to achieve this by these specific mechanisms. This house regrets mainstream commercial films that depict historical subjugation or crimes against humanity. As you see, mainstream or commercial. We are not talking about the documentaries. We are not talking about some level of reporting from the crime. We are not talking about the news. So again, you need to be very specific. What are the major differences, or like the tools which are being used in the commercial and mainstream films in order to depict this? A, they are probably highly on for profit. B, they probably also are like a blockbuster. They are not doing a detailed research. 3, probably they're hiring like the actors, usually might be like depicting some stereotypes. But this is like important part of the motion which you need to focus on. The mainstream commercial film characterization, what does it mean? Next, types of motions. Anyone is familiar with the types of motions? I'll give you a minute to read the slide. And then I will quickly explain what's going on here. All right, so basically the policy motion, it's you arguing about enacting a policy and that need to be concrete course of action. What does it mean? It's presumably, it's very important how effective would be the policy, how you will implement this, because you are looking for the effects of the policy. You are looking for what will happen. So just saying we should do this because it would be good, we should do this in order to fight for this particular part, it's not enough in order to convince people that this is something which you should run in this particular types of motions. So for example, if you were saying that, hey, we should subsidize or we should actively encourage women to have children, seems like a concrete policy. Without saying how you will do it, it's hard to see the effect. But something more like familiar with like in politics, this house would ban using drones on the battlefield or war, right? So it's already hard to control like sphere. So probably if you are banning, you are also seeing some level of punishment if people will be doing that in order to create a hard deterrence. You can say that we will ban this, but no one will supervise this, or you will not go to jail if you will be not following this, because it seems like a very ineffective policy, right? If you will go to say to Russia, oh, please don't use this, or like, please, sir, but we will not punish you, it doesn't seem like will be something which you can implement. The other potential policy which you might have is this house would pay stay-home dad like money, or like this house would implement like the salary for the housewives. Again, you need to explain how it will be done, what's the approximate amount of money. You don't need to be very specific to every penny, but just like a scale will help you how much money you're taking from the budget, how much revenue you are expecting, what kind of sacrifice, who you are taking it from, who might be angry, and why you should prioritize the other issues. Moving on. For policy motions, op teams might choose to defend status quo or propose an alternative in the form of the counterprop. You need to know that counterprop need to be mutually exclusive, and it's not necessarily the best strategy because it takes so much of your time. So firstly, you need to rebut the policy of the prop. Then you need to be sure that your policy it's mutually exclusive. So it can't be enacted at the same time as the gov policy. Then you need to explain why your policy is more likely to happen, all of the steps. Then you need to explain why it's important. So if you don't have a very easy, intuitive country prop in mind, try to not do it. Because also people, when setting motions, they are trying to make the motions which will not have very easy and obvious counter props, because that could benefit opposition side too much. So people trying to check and not make it that appealing to limit a little bit that sort of situation. All right. It's crucial to note that opposition's policy should not take significant more resources to achieve than government's policy, because then you have a fiat, so you have some level of trust that this policy will pass. But if the government have a fiat and some amount of money, that's also equally apply to the opposition, and opposition can claim that way. So summary, policy motions, try to explain and prove how, when, to which extent something will happen, and try to not be too focused on counterpropping in that types of motion. Burdens and tips, not only the reasoning, why we should do this and why this is the right thing to do. That's not equal, so fiat, so that we can do it, it's not equal to how, what does it change, how people will react, what is the benefit of this. You can also write down these questions. I will also send you this presentation, and that might be things which you're asking yourself during the prep time, right? Your partner is like, let's do it. And you are like, what does it change? Tell me. Or like, how the people will react? What if this group of people will be super angry? What's your response? What if these people will say, but what's the benefit of this? Tell me what's the benefit, how I should explain that this is important. Comparative. Not why this is a good idea and might be successful, but why this is better than the alternative. You can use a lot of metrics. Will be faster, will be more certain, will be more equal for the people. Depends what will make you happy and what you think you should prioritize in your cases. In this motions, proportionality is crucial, but I think I talked about the proportionality a lot before, so we don't need to repeat it. Examples. Gender and racial quotas in government cabinets. Hold government officials criminally responsible for severe harm to citizens resulting from grossly negligent public policy. This house would pay additional benefits to families in welfare according to their child's performance in school. This house would require that government ministers be highly qualified and experienced expert in their policy areas. Next. Analysis motions. Motions that open, I will give you a minute to read. All right, I think you had enough time to read it. So basically, believes that it's like a software, right? So you might say why we should do something, why it will be good. However, people still should be able to conceptualize what do you mean. So you are defining the debate, you are characterizing, but you are not presenting a model. In order to that, we will do that tomorrow. We will take the money from here. We will redistribute it there, but still gave a rough idea how to do this. And also, you need to tell what's the criteria. Like what's the metric for example, more harm than good. Because I might say that the metric is, hey, more harm is more expenses. More harm is less healthy. More harm is less educated. So there are a lot of different ideas. So you also need to be a little bit more specific in terms of that. Examples. Prominent civil society activists should choose not to run for elected office. Presumably, the characterization need to be, what are the common features for the prominent civil society activists? Like when you are prominent, when you are not prominent, what are the specific advantage or disadvantage which you might have when you are getting the particular state of the more prominent activists? This house believes that liberal media organizations should actively glorify democratic candidates of color. Again, what the active glorification means, how it will be done. What are the liberal media organizations? That's the two questions which you need to tell people what kind of arguments you are running. It's extremely important. 3, this house believes that the environmental movement should adopt the message of eco-optimism rather than pessimism. Again, even if intuitively, I guess what optimistic and pessimistic is. In the context of eco-optimism, you need to tell me how exactly you imagine this to happen. What will be the difference? It's like eco-optimism. Oh, tomorrow, everything will be green. Like we will have so much drinking water and everything. Not really, right? So you need to be a little bit more specific and a little bit more in the context of the motion, a little bit realistic, as we discussed before. Right, next. This house supports opposes X. Also usually need to involve government proposing a policy. So sometimes it's important, again, to characterize very similar. But also, you might decide what your support means. Political, symbolic, material. Sometimes you are supporting a person, group, institution, cause, idea, value. Again, try to depict this and explain. Types of versions. This house opposes the idealization of parenthood. Obviously, that doesn't mean that we will ban being a parent, but what is the idealization of parenthood? How are people presenting that? What the opposing means? If that means like promoting the other narrative, that means just pointing out the harms out of this. So these are the questions which people wanted to hear from you. Responses. This house supports Asian NATO. This house opposes the dominant social norm in favor of monogamy. This house supports countries withdrawing from the ICC in order to create their own regional replacements. This house supports academic tracking. So there are some things which usually are slightly controversial, right? So you might have something which some group of people supporting, but it's coming with the trade-off that you can't like execute something else at the same time. So again, the question is it worth it? How we are supporting this? This is something which we want to see in a society. Motions that open, this house prefers a world in which X, again, I'll give you a minute to read. All right, so as you can see, the government side have a burden to explain how their world will look like, but obviously we need to be fair. So opposition can't create another world, which is not in a motion, but opposition always need to defend the status quo. So the prop first need to say why they believe that the world which they are describing will look exactly as they are claiming. Op need to firstly say why this is less plausible. B maybe point out the certain benefits from the status quo, which we can already knew that's happening, and which are not speculative because we are looking out of the window and we are seeing how the world look like. So this is also important in the characterization. You need to tell how the things step by step would change. So for example, let's look what we have on the next slide. This house prefer a world in which wealth is seen as shameful. So probably since the beginning of times, or since we recognize that some people are richer, some people are poorer, wealth would not be seen as something desirable, not be seen as something, oh my God, like it's cool, but it will be shameful. Like, why are you wealthy? Like, why you have so much money? So you need to depict how it's likely that people will be reacting, who is likely to be in power, what are the questions or like the social relations which are likely to occur between it. This house prefer a world without organized religion. So probably you will still have beliefs, right? Because it's organized religion, not religion per se. People might still be like, I believe that there is something else. I believe that there is some magic power, but there are no Catholic Church. There are no Islam like as the organization. There are no Pope. There are no centralization of like the faith. There's no like hierarchy, which is like very strict. So you also need to think, how would you depict this? How do you think it's likely to look like? This house prefer a world where all romantic relationships are consensually polyamorous. That's just another example to that. Prefers X to Y. That doesn't mean that you are creating a new world. And this is a mistake which people are making, right? So this house prefer a world. It's different than this house prefers a system of education A to system of education B. That's just like a very strict comparative and discussing the debate, which you can also see on the slides. Okay, I will give you a minute to read about the regrets motions. All right, so regrets motion, the board will be better placed if something would not happen. It might be require you to think retrospectively. So for example, this house regrets the NATO intervention in Yugoslavia, or this house regrets creation of European Union. So we know what happened after, and you can retrospectively say what would happen regardless. So for example, when you are making a decision after like, maybe if you will be on your, if you will go to university, you will remember that there was a period of time when you were 18, when you were picking the university. You could go to try to be a doctor, or you could go to try to go to like the art school. After 5 years, there's a motion. This house, as you like, as Klaudia, regrets picking medicine over the art. So I know what would be my alternative, the first step, but I would also need to explain why it would end well and why it would continue well for the next 5 years, and compare this to the massive amount of like harm, displeasancy, problems which I'm like facing right now. And therefore it's also my metric in order to weigh how this is like occurring, right? So this is another thing which is important in terms of like the characterization. What are the examples of the regrets motions? This house regrets the narrative that glorify elderly. So you can say how like people might glorify some level of like the older people knows better, they are wiser, you are younger, you should not like complain, or like you should not talk about that because you don't know what you were talking about, because these people have like a more experience. The use of moderate Muslim after 9/11. This has regret the corporate sponsorship of LGBT pride parades. Probably we will not have the same amount of parades because someone would need to give money for that. We don't know from where, but maybe we will have more quality parades. Maybe there was an issue which like the corporate sponsorship did for the LGBT parades. Motions that open this house believes that X should. I'll also give you a minute to read. All right, so sometimes if the motion is X should, that doesn't mean that this is an actor motion, that you should only look from the perspective of the actor. In some cases, there is just no better body to do something. When you can see this house believes that the US should sanction Saudi Arabia, presumably it's the interest of the whole world to sanction them if they do something badly, but probably Poland does not have enough significant like relations with Saudi Arabia in order that our sanctioning them will make an impact, but United States already have, right? So that doesn't mean that the debate is what the US should do or should not do, but they are like the designated actor to do something. So unless the motion is this house as US, therefore you are considering the interest of the whole world. Examples. This house believes that the government should make available a publicly searchable database containing the income, wealth, and taxes paid by all citizens. Obviously, this might be in the state interest, but presumably the governments are the only body which will have access and capacity to do something like this database, because like the employers can't do it. Maybe hackers if they would have access, but that sounds very implausible, right? This house believes that companies should adopt the practice of radical transparency. Obviously, this is, again, someone can adopt this, someone can do it. It's also something which can be necessarily helpful. This house believes that the state should force big tech firms, Microsoft, Facebook, Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, to disclose the identity of potential patients and carriers of highly infectious diseases based on their online activities. Obviously, the big tech firms does not have direct interest in curing your disease, because they don't have direct responsibility for the other people, but they are the only one which have capacity to potentially implement this. Therefore, we are looking for the interest of the society, of the whole world. Next, actor motions. This has as A would do X. In that case, only the interest of the actor matters. So as you can see, underline, unlike previously discussed debates, actor debates are not necessarily about whether or not X action is necessarily best for the world. All right, a minute to read. As you can see, actors might care about different things. So I might care about the morality, I might care about the economics, I might care about the power. You need to explain why I'm likely to care about that sort of things. So you can agree on the point of interest, or you can challenge the point of interest. So you might say, oh, if parents are doing something, they don't care about their own well-being, only about the child. And you might be like, no, they might care about both. It doesn't mean that only one matters, because these people might want to, like, you know, have two interests at the same time. Some of them might be more important, but still, like, both can have some level of influence, some level of impact. All right? And the examples. This house at the Catholic Church would publicly punish priests for clear deviations from its faith doctrine and practices. This house as Japan would support closing all US military bases in Japanese territory. You are a CEO of a major clothing company implementing a plan. So again, that's how you're debating the different motion types, how you think about the characterization, how you think about the framing, how you think about like strategic approach to some motion. And summary. All right, so effective prep time. So all of the things which you have in the slides, you should ask yourself, you should think about that during prep. Try to consider. Effective prep time need to cover fields which might be interpreted in different way by different people. Try to not leave any open questions. Try to not create additional questions. Control your case and delivery. Effective prep time need to respond to the comparative. Can't be spent on creating cases in a vacuum. And strategy and the other stuff. So that's the summary. I'm copying now the slides so you'll have access to them. You are not very active group, so I don't think that we need to spend here more time. But if you have any questions, this is the time. Does not need to be related to characterization or framing. Can be very basic. There are no stupid questions. All right. If there are no further questions, thank you so much for coming. If you're, I don't know, shy, or if you will remember something later, feel free to message me. You can find me on Facebook. And that's probably the best way to reach out to me. I will respond if you will need something. All right. Again, thank you for coming.